My mother-in-law raised her glass and said, "You're not family, Emily, you're just the soldier wife we tolerate." And 30 people laughed like it was a joke worth celebrating, my husband included. His silence louder than anything else in that room, and I stood there holding a plate I had cooked for them, realizing in that exact moment that everything I had done for this family meant absolutely nothing. But what they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that less than 48 hours later, my name would be on the order that would freeze every asset they owned and bring their company to a standstill. If this story speaks to your heart, take a moment to like and subscribe, only if it truly resonates with you. And tell me where you're watching from, your city or country, and what time it is there right now. I always read those comments, and they remind me I'm not alone in this. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 33 years old, and that night at my in-laws' anniversary gala was the night everything in my life finally broke, and then changed forever. But this didn't start at that party. It started years earlier, in a house where I learned very quickly that no matter what I did, I would never belong. My husband, Daniel, and I had been married for 5 years. He was kind, quiet, the kind of man who avoided conflict even when it mattered most. His family, on the other hand, thrived on it. The Whitmore family owned a mid-sized logistics company just outside of Arlington, Virginia. On paper, they were respectable, successful, the kind of family that donated to local charities and had their name engraved on plaques at community centers. But inside that family there was a very clear hierarchy, and I was at the bottom of it. From the beginning I was never introduced as Emily. I was introduced as Daniel's wife. And when they found out I was in the military, that label shifted slightly. The soldier wife. They said it with a smile, like it was harmless, like it was a compliment. It wasn't. It was a box they put me in, a way to make sure I stayed exactly where they thought I belonged. I remember the first Thanksgiving after we got married. 40 people in that house. Extended family, business partners, people whose names I couldn't keep track of. I showed up early, 0600. Still in jeans and a sweater, helping in the kitchen, chopping vegetables, setting tables, doing everything I could to be part of it. When guests started arriving, my mother-in-law pulled me aside. She adjusted the sleeve of my sweater like I was something slightly out of place and said, "When people ask, just keep it simple. You support Daniel. No need to go into details." I nodded. I didn't argue. I didn't say that I had spent over a decade building a career, that I had responsibilities that most people in that room couldn't even imagine. I just said, "Of course." Because at that point I still believed that if I was patient enough, kind enough, helpful enough, they would eventually see me as one of them. But they never did. Every holiday was the same. I cooked. I cleaned. I smiled. And I listened. I listened to them talk about business deals, expansions, contracts like I wasn't even in the room. And when I did speak, when I offered something small, something careful, it was either ignored or dismissed with a polite smile that said, "That's nice, dear." They never asked what I actually did. Not really. And Daniel, he would squeeze my hand under the table sometimes like that made up for it. Like silence was easier than standing up. I told myself it was fine. That families were complicated. That I just needed to give it time. But time didn't fix anything. It just made the pattern clearer. Birthdays, anniversaries, company events. I was always there. And I was always separate. The turning point came slowly, in moments that didn't seem important at first. Like the night I overheard my father-in-law on the phone in his office. He didn't know I was in the hallway. He laughed and said, "She's harmless. Just Daniel's wife. Military type. Not really part of the business. Or the family." I stood there for a second, just listening. Then I walked away. I didn't confront him. I didn't tell Daniel. I just filed it away. Because something in me shifted that night. Something quiet. Something permanent. I stopped trying to prove myself to them after that. I still showed up. I still did what was expected. But I stopped expecting anything in return. And maybe that's why what happened at the anniversary gala hurt the way it did. Because even after everything, some part of me still hoped. The Whitmores hosted that event at a private country club. Over 100 guests. Business partners, local officials, people with influence. It was supposed to be a celebration. 25 years of marriage. 25 years of building their company. I wore a simple black dress. Nothing flashy. Nothing that would draw attention. I knew better than that. I stayed close to Daniel, smiled when I needed to, made polite conversation. And then, halfway through the evening, my mother-in-law stood up to give a toast. The room quieted. Glasses raised. Cameras out. She spoke about family, about legacy, about everything they had built. And then her eyes landed on me. And of course, she said, her voice light, almost amused, every family has additions, some more permanent than others. A few people chuckled. I felt Daniel shift beside me, but he didn't say anything. She smiled wider. Emily, she continued, you've been around for a while now, but let's be honest. You were never really family. Just the soldier wife. The laughter this time was louder. Not everyone, but enough. Enough to echo. Enough to stay. I didn't cry. I didn't react. I just stood there. Nodded once. Set my glass down on the table. And in that moment something inside me finally went still. Completely still. Because what they didn't know, what none of them could have imagined, was that while they were celebrating their untouchable empire, there was already a file open on that company. And my name was already on it. I just didn't know yet how far it was all going to go. I went home that night and did exactly what I always did. I took off my heels, set them neatly by the door, and hung my dress back in the closet like nothing had happened. Daniel came in about 20 minutes later. He loosened his tie, sighed, and said, "They did not mean it like that." I did not respond right away. I just stood there at the kitchen counter, staring at a glass of water I had not touched. He walked closer, softer this time. "You know how my mom is." I nodded once. "I know exactly how she is," I said. My voice was calm. Too calm. He hesitated, like he wanted to say something else, something better, but it never came. It never did. That was the pattern. He would get close to defending me, close to saying the right thing, and then he would stop. And every time he stopped, something in me stepped back a little further. That night I did not argue. I did not cry. I just said, "I am tired," and went to bed. But I did not sleep. I lay there staring at the ceiling, replaying every word, every laugh, every glance. Not just from that night. From years. It all stacked together in my mind, one moment after another, until it stopped feeling like separate memories and started feeling like a single truth. I was never meant to belong there. And maybe the worst part was not what they said. It was that they were comfortable saying it out loud. That meant they had always believed it. The next morning, I woke up at 0500. Same as always. Routine does not care about how you feel. I made coffee. Black. No sugar. I stood by the window in our kitchen, watching the sky shift from dark blue to gray. And for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to think something I had been avoiding. What if I stopped trying? What if I just let them think whatever they wanted? That thought stayed with me longer than it should have. Later that morning I drove to base. The guard at the gate checked my identification, saluted, and waved me through. It was automatic. Familiar. A different world entirely. Inside those gates, nobody called me someone's wife. Nobody reduced me to a label that fit their comfort. Inside those gates, my name meant something. My rank meant something. My decisions carried weight. And I realized something as I walked into my building, past people who stood a little straighter when they saw me, people who actually listened when I spoke. There were two versions of my life. And only one of them was real. My office was quiet when I stepped in. Clean desk. Organized files. The way I liked it. I set my bag down, turned on my computer, and started reviewing the reports that had come in overnight. Most of it was routine. Procurement reviews. Compliance checks. Logistics summaries. But then there was one file. It had been flagged. Not urgent. Just unusual. I opened it. It was a compliance report tied to a civilian contractor. A mid-sized logistics company operating in multiple states. The name felt familiar, but I could not place it right away. I scrolled slowly. Line by line. Contracts. Shipments. Routing data. And then I saw it. Whitmore Logistics. I paused. Just for a second. Then I kept reading. Because that is what I do. I do not react first. I analyze. The report was not an accusation. Not yet. It was a collection of inconsistencies. Delays that did not match documentation. Routing patterns that suggested something was being redirected. Nothing obvious. Nothing that would stand out to someone who was not looking closely. But I had spent years learning how to see patterns that other people missed. And there was a pattern here. A quiet one. The kind that builds slowly until it becomes impossible to ignore. I leaned back in my chair, reading it again. Slower this time. My name was not on this case. Not officially. It had just passed through my desk because of my position. I could have closed it. Passed it along. Let someone else handle it. That would have been the easier choice. Cleaner. Safer. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I reached for my phone. Not to call anyone. Just to look. I opened a photo from the night before. The gala. The smiles. The raised glasses. My mother-in-law standing there, confident, untouchable. I closed the photo, set the phone down, and went back to the file. Because suddenly this was not just another report. This was something else entirely. I did not say anything to anyone that day. I did not flag it as urgent. I did not draw attention to it. I just started looking deeper. Quietly. Carefully. Pulling additional records. Cross-referencing timelines. Checking authorizations. Each piece small on its own. Insignificant. But together they started forming something much larger. And the more I looked, the clearer it became. This was not a mistake. This was not a one-time oversight. This was a system. Built over time. Hidden in plain sight. I sat there staring at the screen, and for the first time since that night, I felt something shift inside me again. Not anger. Not even satisfaction. Just clarity. Because what they had said about me, what they believed, none of it mattered. Here there were rules. And those rules applied to everyone. Even them. I closed the file slowly, my hand resting on the mouse for a second longer than necessary. Because I knew something now that they did not. And I did not know it yet. But this was the beginning of everything changing. I did not tell Daniel about the file. Not that night. Not the next day. Not even when he casually mentioned over dinner that his father was expanding operations into new federal contracts, and that things were finally moving to the next level. I just nodded and asked him to pass the salt. That was the strange part about it. On the outside, nothing changed. I still showed up to family dinners. I still smiled at the right moments. I still let my mother-in-law correct the way I set the table like I was a guest who needed instruction. But inside, something had shifted completely. Because now, every time they spoke about their company, I heard it differently. Every detail mattered. Every small comment became a piece of something larger. And they talked a lot. They always had. They liked to feel important. They liked to explain things, especially when they assumed no one in the room could truly understand them. Especially me. A week after the gala, we were back at their house for Sunday dinner. The same long table. The same polished silverware. The same unspoken hierarchy. I arrived 10 minutes early like I always did. My mother-in-law opened the door, glanced at me and said, "You are just in time. The table needs setting." Not hello. Not welcome. Just instructions. I stepped inside, set my bag down and went straight to the dining room. Plates. Glasses. Napkins. Everything in its exact place. I had done it enough times that I did not need to think about it anymore. Voices drifted in from the living room. My father-in-law, Daniel, and his younger brother, Ethan. They were talking business again. Loud enough to be heard. Confident enough not to care who listened. "The new contract is going to change everything," his father said. "Once it clears, we will be operating at a completely different level." Ethan laughed. "As long as nobody looks too closely at the routing structure." There was a pause. Then a quieter laugh. "They never do," his father replied. I froze for half a second. Just long enough for the words to land. Then I kept moving. Placing forks. Adjusting glasses. Like I had not heard anything at all. But I had. And that single sentence sat in my mind heavy and precise. Because it matched the pattern I had seen in the file. The routing inconsistencies. The subtle deviations. It was not random. It was intentional. Dinner started 15 minutes later. Everyone in their seats. Conversations overlapping. I stayed quiet. I always did at first. Listening. Observing. letting the room settle into its usual rhythm. My mother-in-law began describing the gala to someone who had not attended. It was beautiful, she said. Everything went perfectly. Her eyes flicked toward me for a split second before she added, well, almost everything. A small smile. Controlled. Practiced. I lowered my gaze to my plate. Did not react. Did not give her anything to work with. That was something I had learned over time. They fed off reactions. Silence took that away. Halfway through dinner, my father-in-law turned to Daniel. We will need you more involved moving forward, he said. The company is expanding. It is time you step up. Daniel nodded. Of course. Then his father glanced at me. Just briefly. Some of us build things that last, he added. Not everyone understands that. I took a sip of water. Set the glass down carefully. You are right, I said, my voice even. Not everyone does. The table went quiet for a moment. Not because of what I said, but because I had said something at all. Then the conversation moved on like it always did. Like I had not spoken. But I noticed something. My father-in-law looked at me a second longer than usual, like he was trying to play something he could not quite understand. I looked away first, because I was not ready for him to see it. Not yet. The rest of the evening passed the same way. Small comments. Subtle dismissals. The usual pattern. But now every piece felt different, because now I knew something they did not. When we left that night, Daniel seemed lighter. Talking about future plans. About how his father finally trusted him more. I listened. Nodded. Said the right things. But my mind was somewhere else entirely. Back at my desk. Back at that file. Back at the pattern that was becoming clearer. With every passing day. The next morning I went in earlier than usual. 0430. The building was almost empty. Just a few lights on. The kind of quiet that makes it easier to think. I pulled up the file again. Then I opened 3 more. Related contractors. Parallel routes. Similar inconsistencies. It was not just one company. It was a network. And Whitmore Logistics was right in the center of it. I started mapping it out. One connection at a time. Shipment paths. Contract overlaps. Timing discrepancies. Took hours. And when I finally leaned back in my chair, the picture in front of me was no longer vague. It was clear. Structured. Deliberate. I stared at it for a long moment. Then I did something I had not done before. I flagged the file. Not as urgent. Not yet. Just elevated. Enough to move it up the chain. Enough to make sure it did not disappear. Because that was the risk. Files like this could vanish if nobody pushed them forward. And something told me this one had been sitting quietly for a while. Waiting. I saved my work. Closed the system. And sat there for a second longer than necessary. Because I knew what this meant. Not completely. Not yet. But enough to understand that this was bigger than a family issue. Bigger than anything they had ever said about me. This was about rules. Systems. Authority. And for the first time those things were not working in their favor. I stood up, straightened my uniform, and walked out of my office without looking back. Because what I had just set in motion was not something that could be undone. Once a file moves up the chain, it does not move quietly. It leaves traces. It triggers reviews. It invites questions. And questions in my world have weight. I noticed the shift 2 days later. It was subtle. The kind of thing most people would miss. A request for additional documentation. A secondary review assigned. Nothing alarming on its own. But together it meant one thing. Someone else had started looking. I kept my routine exactly the same. Same arrival time. Same pace. Same tone in every meeting. Because the worst thing I could do now was draw attention to myself. Not when the process was already in motion. At home nothing had changed either. Daniel was still talking about the company like it was his future. His father had started including him in more conversations. More meetings. More decisions. I could see it in the way he carried himself. Straighter. More confident. Like he was finally stepping into something he had always wanted. And part of me wondered if I should tell him. Just once. Just enough to give him a chance to prepare. But every time I thought about it, I remembered that night. The laughter. The silence. the way he stood next to me and said nothing. So I stayed quiet. That Friday, we went back to his parents' house again. It was not a holiday, not a celebration, just dinner. But in that house, every dinner felt like a performance. I walked in with the same calm expression I had learned to wear. My mother-in-law barely looked at me this time. Just a quick glance and a short, "Kitchen is that way." I nodded and moved past her. Inside, everything was already set up. Ingredients laid out. Pots on the stove. She liked control. She liked things done her way. And I had learned that the fastest way through the evening was to follow the pattern she expected. As I chopped vegetables, I could hear them again in the other room. My father-in-law's voice, steady and confident. "We are ahead of schedule," he said. "The new contracts are going to secure us for the next decade." Ethan responded with a laugh. "And nobody is asking questions?" A pause. Then my father-in-law said, quieter this time, "They do not have a reason to." I kept my hands steady, knife moving in clean, even motions. But inside, I felt that same clarity from earlier in the week. Because now I knew they were wrong. Someone was asking questions. They just did not know it yet. Dinner was quieter than usual. Not silent, but different. Like something in the air had shifted slightly, even if no one could name it. Halfway through the meal, Daniel mentioned a meeting he had attended earlier that day. "We might have to adjust some of our routing processes," he said, "just to stay ahead of any potential compliance reviews." The table went still for half a second, just long enough to feel it. Then his father smiled. "Controlled. That is just standard procedure," he said. "Nothing to worry about." Daniel nodded. But I saw it. A flicker of uncertainty. Small. Almost invisible. But it was there. I looked down at my plate. Said nothing. Because this was how it starts. Not with panic. Not with collapse. Just small adjustments. Small doubts. The kind that grow over time. After dinner, as everyone moved into the living room, my mother-in-law stopped me near the doorway. "Next time," she said quietly, "try not to insert yourself into conversations that do not concern you." I met her eyes for a second. Then I nodded. "Of course," I said. Calm. Respectful. Exactly what she expected. But something in my expression must have been different. Because she hesitated. Just slightly. Like she could not quite place what she was seeing. Then she turned away. The rest of the evening passed like every other one. Polite conversations. Controlled smiles. The same invisible line that kept me separate from the rest of them. But now that line felt temporary. When we got home, Daniel seemed distracted. He sat on the edge of the couch, staring at his phone longer than usual. "Everything okay?" I asked. He nodded. "Yeah, just work stuff." He paused, then added, "There might be some kind of internal review coming up. Nothing serious." I leaned against the counter, arms crossed loosely. "That sounds normal," I said. He looked up at me, searching for something. Reassurance, maybe. Or certainty. I gave him neither. Just a neutral expression. Because the truth was, I did not know how serious it would become either. Not yet. But I knew it would not stay small. The next week, things moved faster. Requests turned into formal inquiries. Inquiries turned into scheduled audits. Still quiet. Still controlled. But no longer invisible. I stayed in my lane. Reviewed what came across my desk. Responded when required. And watched. Always watching. Because every new document confirmed what I had already seen. The pattern was real. The system was real. And it was being uncovered piece by piece. One morning I received a notification. A higher-level review had been authorized. Not just for Whitmore Logistics. For the entire network connected to it. I read the message twice. Slowly. Then I leaned back in my chair and exhaled. Because that was the moment it crossed a line. From possibility to inevitability. I closed my eyes for a second. Not out of stress. Not out of fear. Just acknowledgement. Because from this point on there was no stopping it. No quiet resolution. No easy way out. This was going to reach them. Their office. Their accounts. Their operations. And when it did, everything would change. I opened my eyes, looked at the screen again, and moved to the next file. Because for now my role was still the same. Stay calm. Stay precise. Let the system do what it was built to do. And wait. Because what they had built was about to be tested. And I did not know it yet. But they were not ready for what was coming. The first real crack did not happen in their office. It happened at their dining table. It was a Tuesday night, unplanned, the kind of dinner they threw together when something was on their mind but nobody wanted to say it out loud yet. Daniel told me on the drive over that his father had called twice that afternoon, which almost never happened. He sounded off, he said, his fingers tightening slightly on the steering wheel. I looked out the window and said nothing, 'cause I already knew why. When we walked in, the energy in the house was different. Not loud, not tense, just controlled. Too controlled. My mother-in-law greeted us with a quick smile that did not reach her eyes. Sit, she said. We are waiting on you. No mention of the kitchen. No instructions. That alone told me everything had shifted. We took our seats. My father-in-law was already there. Hands folded on the table, a folder sitting just slightly off to his right. Ethan was pacing near the window, checking his phone every few seconds. No one was talking. Not really. Just short sentences. Surface-level things. Like they were all trying to pretend this was normal. Dinner started but no one ate much. Forks moved. Plates shifted. But the focus was not on the food. It was on that folder. I could feel it. Every few seconds someone's eyes drifted toward it and then away again. Finally, my father-in-law cleared his throat. We received a notice this morning, he said. His voice was steady. Practiced. But there was something underneath it. Something tight. Daniel looked up immediately. What kind of notice? He asked. A pause. Then his father opened the folder slowly. Compliance review, he said. Preliminary. Ethan stopped pacing. Preliminary, he repeated. That does not just happen. My father-in-law did not respond right away. He flipped a page, then another. It is routine, he said. We are expanding. These things happen. But his tone did not match his words. Daniel leaned forward slightly. What are they asking for? Another pause. Longer this time. Documentation, his father said. Routing data. Contract histories. Internal approvals. Ethan let out a short breath. That is a lot. Silence settled over the table again. Heavy this time. Real. I picked up my glass of water and took a small sip. Set it down carefully. My hands were steady. My expression neutral. But inside I felt that same clarity sharper now. Because this was no longer distant. It had reached them. Exactly like I knew it would. My mother-in-law finally spoke. This is ridiculous, she said. We have done nothing wrong. Her eyes flicked toward me for a split second, then away. I did not react. Did not acknowledge it. Because this was not about me. Not in their minds. Not yet. Daniel looked between his father and brother. Do we need legal? He asked. His father shook his head immediately. Not at this stage, he said. We handle this internally. Ethan was not as convinced. If they are asking for routing data, that means they are already looking deeper, he said. This is not surface level. My father-in-law's jaw tightened slightly. We will respond appropriately, he said. There is no reason to escalate this. I watched them. Each reaction. Each hesitation. The confidence from before was still there, but it was thinner now. More fragile. Like a layer that could crack if pressed too hard. And for the first time I saw something I had never seen in that room before. Uncertainty. Dinner ended early. No dessert. No extended conversations. Just quiet movement. Plates cleared. Chairs pushed back. People retreating into their own thoughts. As we stood to leave, my father-in-law stopped Daniel near the door. We will need you at the office tomorrow, he said. Early. Daniel nodded. Of course. Then his father glanced at me. Just briefly. Longer than usual. Like he was trying to read something he could not quite understand. I met his gaze. Calm. Steady. Then looked away first. Because I was still not ready for him to see it. Not yet. In the car Daniel was quiet. Hands tight on the wheel again. This is probably nothing, he said after a few minutes. More to himself than to me. Just timing. I nodded. Maybe, I said. He glanced at me, searching again. You do not seem worried. I looked at him for a second, then back at the road. I try not to worry about things I cannot control, I said. It was the truth, just not the whole truth. The next morning I arrived even earlier than usual. The building was almost empty again. Same quiet, same stillness. But this time it felt different. Because now I knew the process had reached the point where it would accelerate. I pulled up the system and checked the case. The status had changed. Formal audit initiated. I read the line once, then again. Slow, precise. Because that was the moment everything shifted from possibility to action. I scrolled through the updates. Assigned teams. Scheduled requests. Deadlines. Structured. Organized. Unavoidable. And then I saw something else. A list of authorized personnel overseeing the audit. My eyes moved down the names, one by one, until they stopped, because my name was there. Not at the top, not as lead, but there. Involved. Official. I sat back in my chair, my hand resting lightly on the desk, because this was the point where the lines between my two worlds stopped running parallel, and started to intersect. I closed the file slowly, my mind already moving ahead, calculating, preparing. Because from this point on, everything I did would matter. Every decision. Every signature. Every moment of silence. I stood up, straightened my uniform and took a slow breath. Because what they were facing now was no longer abstract. It was structured. It was real. And I was no longer just watching it happen. I was part of it. And they still had no idea. I did not react when I saw my name on the authorization list. I did not smile. I did not pause for too long. I simply closed the file and continued with the next task like it was any other morning. Because in my world, control is not about what you feel. It is about what you show. And what I showed was nothing. The briefing was scheduled for 0900. Conference room 3. Standard protocol. I arrived 5 minutes early, took a seat near the middle of the table and placed my folder in front of me. Others filed in one by one. Analysts, compliance officers, a legal advisor, people I had worked with before, people who understood how these processes worked. No one spoke much. Just quiet nods. Professional acknowledgement. At exactly 0900, the lead investigator walked in. Lieutenant Colonel Harris. Late 40s. Precise. Methodical. The kind of person who did not waste words. He placed his folder on the table, looked around the room once and began. We are here to review a multi-entity compliance concern involving federal logistics contracts, he said. His voice was steady, neutral. This is now a formal audit. That means documentation will be requested, reviewed, and verified. No assumptions. No shortcuts. He paused briefly. If there are irregularities, they will be addressed. Simple. Direct. Final. He began assigning roles. Data review. Contract analysis. Financial tracing. When he reached my name, he did not hesitate. Captain Carter, he said, looking directly at me. You will oversee routing analysis and cross-reference verification. I nodded once. Yes, sir. No emotion. No hesitation. Just acknowledgement. But inside I understood exactly what that meant. Routing analysis was not surface work. It was where patterns became evidence. Where small inconsistencies turned into something undeniable. The meeting moved quickly after that. Timelines. Deadlines. Reporting structure. By 0930 it was over. Everyone stood, gathered their materials, and left without unnecessary conversation. That is how it works when something matters. No one wastes time. Back at my desk, I opened the system again. The scope had expanded. More data. More access. More visibility. I began pulling records immediately. Shipment logs. Authorization chains. Timestamp comparisons. Each piece precise. Each piece necessary. Hours passed without interruption. Just the quiet rhythm of work. And with every file I opened, every line I reviewed, the picture became sharper. Clearer. This was not an accident. It was not poor management. It was structured. Intentional. Built to avoid detection by staying just within acceptable limits. But now that someone was looking closely, those limits were no longer enough. Around midday, I received my first direct request. Additional routing data from Whitmore Logistics. Specific. Detailed. Time-sensitive. I read the request twice, then forwarded it through the proper channels. No personal involvement. No deviation from protocol. Because that was the key. Everything had to remain clean. Documented. Unquestionable. By the afternoon, responses started coming in. Partial at first. Then more complete. Reviewed each submission carefully, cross-checking against what we already had. And that was when the first clear discrepancy appeared. Small. Easy to miss. A shipment that had been logged as direct delivery, but showed a secondary routing delay that was not documented. I flagged it, added a note, moved on. Then another. Similar pattern. Different location. Different date. Same inconsistency. I flagged that too. By the time the day ended, I had identified 7 separate instances. Not enough to conclude anything on their own. But together they formed something stronger. A pattern that could not be ignored. I leaned back in my chair looking at the screen. 7 entries. Clean. Organized. Documented. And I knew this was just the beginning. That evening Daniel texted me. Long day. Dad is stressed. I stared at the message for a second, then replied, I understand. Nothing more. When I got home he was already there. Sitting at the kitchen table, his laptop open, papers spread out in front of him. He looked up as I walked in. They are asking for everything, he said. Every record. Every route. Every approval. I set my bag down and nodded. That sounds thorough, I said. He ran a hand through his hair. It is not supposed to escalate this fast. I leaned against the counter, arms relaxed at my sides. Sometimes things move quickly, I said. He looked at me again. Longer this time. Like he was trying to connect something he could not quite see. You really are not worried, he said. I held his gaze for a moment, then shook my head slightly. Worry does not change outcomes, I said. He exhaled slowly and looked back at his laptop. I just do not understand where this is coming from. I did not answer. Because the truth was it had not come from nowhere. It had been building for a long time. Piece by piece. Quietly. Just like everything else in that family. The next morning the pace increased again. More requests. More responses. More discrepancies. What had been 7 became 12. Then 18. Each one small. Each one precise. And each one pointing in the same direction. I compiled my findings into a preliminary report. Clean. Structured. No assumptions. Just data. Just patterns. Just facts. When I submitted it, I did not feel anything. No satisfaction. No hesitation. Just completion. Because this was not personal. Not here. Not in this room. This was process. And process does not care about relationships. It does not care about history. It does not care about who you are outside of it. It only cares about what can be proven. And what could be proven was starting to become very clear. By the end of the week, a follow-up briefing was scheduled. Higher level. More oversight. I saw the notification come through on my screen and read it once. Then again. Slow. Deliberate. Because I knew what that meant. The next phase was beginning. And once it did, there would be no more quiet adjustments. No more controlled conversations at dinner tables. This would move beyond their house, beyond their company, into something they could not manage, something they could not dismiss. I closed the system, stood up, and adjusted the sleeve of my uniform, because I was no longer just observing the shift. I was part of the force driving it, and they still believed they were in control. The second briefing was nothing like the first. The room was larger. More people. Different faces. Higher ranks. The kind of room where every word carried weight even before it was spoken. I took my seat without hesitation, placing my folder in front of me with the same controlled movement I always used. No rush. No nerves. Just precision. Lieutenant Colonel Harris stood at the front again. But this time there were 2 additional officers beside him. One from legal. One from oversight. That alone told me everything had escalated. We have identified consistent irregularities across multiple routing chains, Harris began. His tone was the same. Calm. Measured. This is no longer a preliminary concern. This is a structured pattern. He paused, letting the words settle in the room. No one interrupted. No one shifted, because everyone there understood exactly what that meant. He began calling on team leads to present findings, data summaries, contract inconsistencies, timeline overlaps. Each report layered on top of the last, building something that was no longer abstract. It was clear, defined. When my name was called, I stood, opened my folder and stepped forward. "Captain Carter," Harris said. I nodded once. "Routing analysis shows repeated deviations from declared paths," I said, my voice steady, even. "These deviations are not random. They follow a consistent structure across multiple contracts." I placed the documents on the table, sliding them forward. In each case, the recorded route differs from the actual movement timeline. The discrepancies are small individually, but consistent collectively. I did not add anything extra. No interpretation. No emphasis. Just facts. That is how you make something undeniable. One of the officers leaned forward slightly. "Are these deviations authorized?" he asked. I shook my head once. "There is no documentation supporting the changes," I said. "And the approval chains do not reflect any adjustments." A brief silence followed. Not confusion. Not doubt. Just acknowledgement. Because at this level, people do not react loudly. They process. Harris nodded. "Continue monitoring and expand cross-referencing," he said. "We will proceed to the next phase." I stepped back, returned to my seat, and closed my folder. My hands were steady, my expression unchanged. But inside I understood what had just happened. The line had moved again. From pattern to confirmation. The meeting ended quickly after that. No wasted time. No unnecessary discussion. Just clear direction. Clear next steps. As I walked out of the room, I could feel the shift in the air. Not tension. Not urgency. Just inevitability. Back at my desk, the system had already updated. Expanded authority. Broader access. New requests queued for review. I sat down and began working immediately. Because once it reaches this stage, everything accelerates. Data flows faster. Decisions come sooner. And there is less room for anything to be overlooked. That afternoon, the first official notice of expanded audit was sent out. Not just to Whitmore Logistics, but to every connected entity. Formal. Documented. Unavoidable. I saw the outgoing record. Clean. Precise. Signed at a level above mine. And I knew that somewhere at that exact moment, someone in that family was reading it. Trying to understand it. Trying to control it. But they could not. Because this was no longer something that could be managed from inside their office. That evening, Daniel called me before I even left the building. "It is getting worse," he said immediately. No greeting. No build-up. Just that. I leaned back slightly in my chair. "What happened?" I asked. "They expanded it," he said. "It is not just one review anymore. It is everything. All contracts. All routes." His voice was tight. Controlled but barely. I closed my eyes for a second. Not from stress. Just to center myself. "That sounds comprehensive," I said. He let out a short breath. "You keep saying things like that," he said. "Like this is normal." I opened my eyes again. Looked at the screen in front of me. "It is a process," I said. "Processes follow their own path." There was a pause on the line. Then he said, quieter, "My dad is not sleeping." I did not respond right away. Because that detail, that was new. That was real. When we got home, the atmosphere was different again. Not just controlled. Not just quiet. Strained. Daniel paced the living room, his phone in his hand. Messages coming in faster than he could respond to them. "They want documentation. We cannot even pull that quickly," he said. "Some of it goes back years." I set my bag down and watched him for a moment. "Then you gather what you can," I said. He stopped pacing and looked at me. "You really think this is just about paperwork?" he asked. I held his gaze. Calm. Steady. "I think it is about accuracy," I said. He stared at me for a second longer. Like he was trying to see past what I was saying. Then he shook his head slightly and looked away. "I just do not understand how this even started," he said. I turned toward the kitchen, pouring myself a glass of water. Sometimes things start long before anyone notices, I said. He did not respond to that. The next morning the pressure increased again. Additional discrepancies confirmed. More patterns identified. The report I had submitted was now part of a larger compilation. Integrated. Expanded. No longer just my findings, but a collective conclusion. And then just before midday I received the notification. Authorization request pending. Higher level action required. I opened it slowly. Read every line. Because this was the step before everything changes. The step where findings turn into consequences. The request outlined potential actions. Temporary suspension of operations. Asset review. Contract holds. Nothing final yet. But close. Very close. I sat there reading it again. Slow. Deliberate. Because I understood exactly what it meant. This was no longer about identifying problems. This was about responding to them. I closed the request window and leaned back in my chair, my hands resting lightly on the desk. Because the next step would require a decision. Not from me alone, but one that I would be part of. And once that decision was made, there would be no going back. I stood up, straightened my uniform, and looked out through the glass panel of my office. People moving. Conversations happening. Everything normal. Everything routine. But underneath it something was shifting. Something final. And they still did not see it coming. The authorization request sat on my screen longer than anything else had. Not because I did not understand it, but because I understood it completely. This was the moment where everything stopped being theoretical. Where every pattern, every discrepancy, every quiet observation turned into action. I read it once. Then again. Slow. Precise. The language was clear. If approved, the next phase would initiate immediate operational restrictions. Temporary holds on active contracts. Asset access limitations. Full internal review under federal oversight. It was not a suggestion. It was a mechanism. I rested my hand lightly on the desk and exhaled slowly. Because this was no longer about watching. This was about deciding. The meeting to finalize the authorization was scheduled for 1400. Smaller room this time. Fewer people. Only those directly involved in the decision. I arrived early again. Same as always. Took my seat. Placed my folder in front of me. No movement wasted. No expression given. Lieutenant Colonel Harris entered exactly on time, followed by the legal officer and one additional senior authority I had not seen before. Civilian oversight. That alone meant the outcome would not be delayed. Harris opened the meeting without introduction. We have sufficient evidence to proceed with operational restriction, he said. His tone was the same as always. Calm. Measured. The question is timing. The legal officer spoke next. Delaying increases risk of data alteration, she said. Immediate action preserves integrity. The civilian authority nodded slightly. Agreed. Harris looked around the table once. Any objections? Silence. Not hesitation. Not uncertainty. Just silence. Because at this point there were no arguments left. The decision had already been made. This was just the formal step. Harris turned slightly toward me. Captain Carter, he said. I met his gaze. Yes, sir. Your analysis supports immediate action? I did not pause. Yes, sir, I said. The pattern is consistent and ongoing. He held my gaze for half a second longer, then nodded once. Understood. He closed the folder in front of him. Proceed. Just one word. No emphasis. No reaction. But that word carried everything. The meeting ended within minutes. No follow-up discussion. No unnecessary conversation. Just execution. Back at my desk, the system updated in real time. Authorization approved. Action initiated. I watched the status change. Line by line. Step by step. Like watching something shift from potential to reality. Requests converted into orders. Reviews converted into enforcement. Clean. Structured. Final. And then I saw it. The execution order. The document that would activate the restrictions. My role was listed clearly. Routing authority verification and compliance confirmation. That meant one thing. My approval was part of the process. Not the only one, but necessary. I opened the document and read through it carefully. Every line, every clause, every condition. Because once this moved forward, there would be no reversal without consequence. I reached for my pen. Not immediately. Just rested my hand near it. As I needed 1 second. Just one. Not to doubt. Not to hesitate. But to acknowledge what this meant outside of this room. Outside of this system. I thought about that dining table. The laughter. The words. The way they had looked at me like I was temporary. Replaceable. Not part of anything that mattered. And then I let that go. Completely. Because this was not about that. Not here. Not now. This was about the system doing exactly what it was built to do. I picked up the pen and signed. Clean. Precise. No hesitation. Just my name. And with that it moved forward. Within minutes, confirmation notices began to populate the system. Execution in progress. Notifications sent. Access points updated. Operations flagged. I leaned back in my chair watching the updates come through. Not fast. Not chaotic. Just steady. Controlled. Like everything else. That evening my phone rang before I even left the building. Daniel. I answered. Hey, I said. There was no response for a second. Then his voice came through, tighter than I had ever heard it. They froze something, he said. No greeting. No context. Just that. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, then opened them again. What do you mean? I asked. Accounts, he said. Access. Contracts. I do not even know. Everything is paused. I leaned back slightly in my chair. That sounds like part of the review process, I said. He let out a sharp breath. This is not normal, he said. This is not just a review anymore. I did not respond immediately, because he was right. It was not. When I got home the house felt different. Not loud. Not chaotic. Just heavy. Like something had settled over it that could not be ignored. Daniel was standing in the kitchen, his phone still in his hand. They cannot access half their systems, he said. Dad is trying to get answers but no one is responding. I set my bag down slowly. That usually means the process is already in motion, I said. He stared at me. Longer than before. Searching. You keep saying things like you know exactly what is happening, he said. I met his gaze. Calm. Steady. I understand how these processes work, I said. That was the truth. Just not the part he needed. He looked away first this time. Ran a hand through his hair. This could ruin them, he said quietly. I did not respond, because ruin is not a single moment. It is a process, just like everything else. And that process had already started. Later that night as I stood by the window again, looking out at the quiet street, I felt something I had not felt since this began. Not relief, not satisfaction, just finality, because the line had been crossed. The decision had been made, and everything that came next was no longer preventable, and for the first time they were no longer in control. Life did not collapse after that week. It did not explode into something dramatic or loud. It shifted quietly like everything else had. The company did not disappear overnight, but it changed. Contracts were suspended. Reviews continued. Systems stayed restricted. And for the first time since I had known them, the Whitmore family stopped acting like they were untouchable. They spoke softer, moved slower, thought before they answered questions. Daniel stopped going into the office every day. First it was temporary. Then it became less frequent. Then it became a conversation we both knew was coming. One evening he sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same place where we had shared so many quiet moments, and he said, I do not think I can go back there the same way. I nodded. Not because I was surprised, but because I had already seen it happening. Then do not, I said. It was simple. It was honest. And for the first time in a long time he did not look conflicted. He looked certain. His relationship with his family changed too. Not broken. Not completely gone. But different. There were fewer calls. Fewer dinners. Fewer moments where silence filled the space where something important should have been said. And as for me, I stopped going entirely. Not out of anger. Not out of revenge. Just clarity. Because I finally understood something I had spent years trying to ignore. You cannot earn a place in a room where you were never meant to belong. And more importantly, you do not have to. My life now is quieter. Not perfect, but steady. I wake up at 0500. I make my coffee. I stand by the same window. But the feeling is different. Lighter. Clearer. I do not carry their words with me anymore. I do not replay those moments in my head. They happened. They mattered. But they do not define me. And that is the difference. If you are listening to this, and you have ever felt like you had to prove your worth to people who had already decided who you were, I want you to hear this clearly. You do not. You do not have to shrink yourself to fit into someone else's idea of family. You do not have to stay in spaces where you are tolerated instead of valued. And you do not have to wait for someone else to recognize your worth before you start believing in it yourself. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is step back. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just completely. Because peace does not come from being accepted by the wrong people. It comes from no longer needing them to. Thank you for listening to my story. Truly. If you have made it this far, I hope you feel a little less alone in whatever you are carrying. And if this story stayed with you, I would love to hear yours. Where are you right now in your life? And what is one thing you are finally learning to let go of? Only if this story truly resonated with you, you can like and subscribe. My name is Emily Carter, 33 years old, and the lesson I want to leave with you is this. Your value is not decided by the people who refuse to see it.